Theresa May was left humiliated as EU President Donald Tusk appeared to side with hardline Tory Brexiteers opposed to her Chequers plan. In a brutal slapdown, timed for the day after Mrs May's keynote speech to Conservative Party conference, Mr Tusk offered the kind of Brexit deal backed by Jacob Rees-Mogg and ex-Brexit Secretary David Davis over her Chequers plan. And he accused Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt of being unwise and insulting by comparing the EU to the Soviet Union. It is a blow for Theresa May. Image, Andy Stenning, Daily Mirror. It came as Mrs May's negotiating team was left with just 9 days to finalize a Brexit deal ahead of crunch EU talks later this month. Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab is expected to head to Brussels for more talks next week. The 27 EU leaders are set to discuss Brexit over dinner on October 17, and Britain has been told the pieces of a divorce deal must be in place by the start of that week. The Canada deal, suggested by the EU, would keep Britain out of the single market and customs union, but would guarantee a free trade deal and cooperation on security matters. But Mr Tusk's plan would keep Northern Ireland inside EU economic rules, something Mrs May has strongly rejected. In her speech on Wednesday, Mrs May repeated her call for the EU to show Britain respect in the negotiations. Donald Tusk said that being honest was showing respect. Image, Getty Images Europe. But Mr Tusk hit back, tweeting, "From the very beginning, the EU offer has been a Canada deal. Much further reaching on trade, internal security and foreign policy cooperation. This is a true measure of respect. And this offer remains in place." Speaking at Tory conference this week, Jacob Rees-Mogg referred to such a deal, also referred to as Super Canada, as Canada Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, which, as you all know, is a word developed by a nanny, and nannies are jolly good things. Mr Tusk also hit back at Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, who compared the EU to the Soviet Union in his speech to Tory conference on Tuesday, saying it was as unwise as it is insulting. Asked whether Mr Hunt should resign over his comments, made during his speech to Tory conference in Birmingham, Mr Tusk replied, "That's not my problem." At a press briefing in Brussels, Mr Tusk said, "In respecting our partners, we expect the same in return." Comparing the EU to the Soviet Union is as unwise as it is insulting. The Soviet Union was about prisons and gulags, borders and walls, violence against citizens and neighbors. The European Union is about freedom and human rights, prosperity and peace, life without fear. It is about democracy and pluralism, a continent without internal borders and walls. Jeremy Hunt's comments did not go down well. Image, AFP. As the President of the European Council and someone who spent half his life in the Soviet bloc, I know what I am talking about. Standing beside Irish Premier Leo Varadkar, he slammed British politicians for rejecting EU proposals to keep Northern Ireland inside EU economic rules. He said, "Emotional arguments that stress the issue of dignity sound attractive, but they do not facilitate agreement. Every actor in this process has their dignity, and confrontation in this field will not lead to anything good. No one can expect that because of Brexit, the EU will give up its fundamental values and key interests." Meanwhile, the boss of RBS Bank warned a no-deal Brexit could plunge the UK economy into recession. Ross McEwan, chief executive of the majority taxpayer-owned bank, told the BBC a bad Brexit could result in zero or negative economic growth. He said such poor growth would hit RBS share price. He also said the bank was becoming careful about lending to certain sectors of the economy, particularly retail and construction. RBS is still 64% owned by the taxpayer following its bailout 10 years ago. Mr. McEwan said, "We are assuming 1 to 1.5% growth for next year, but if we get a bad Brexit then that could be zero or negative, and that would affect our profitability and our share price." The news that RBS is withdrawing credit will heap further woes on the retail sector, which has already seen nearly 2,000 stores close so far this year. He added, "There are some retailers we are having to be a bit more cautious about because they haven't made the necessary transition from bricks and mortar to digital.